Hey, Man here from Candidate X. Welcome to the I Am Candidate X with series. In each episode of this series, we'll be exploring the stories, ideas and visions of entrepreneurs, innovators, organisations, community members and their impact in the world, all through a diversity lens. By sharing their journeys, we can raise awareness and understanding about the importance of inclusion and diversity in the workplace. There is so much to do. Talking about it is a good place to start. Follow the Candidate X podcast. Tell us what you think on our socials, share your own experiences and join the conversation with us. I want to also take this opportunity to do an open call for any organisations, companies or community members who would like to appear on or sponsor our podcast. If you believe diversity, equality and inclusion is at the heart of what you do or your organisation, we'd love to hear from you. You could appear right here engaging with the Candidate X community. Contact us on candidatex.co. But let's get to it. Recorded in person before the lockdown. We're very proud and excited to share our conversation with Alice Curry, a founder addressing the lack of diversity in children's books, because all children deserve to see themselves in the books they read. Enjoy the show. Hi everyone, welcome to the Candidate X podcast, a show about community, innovators, entrepreneurs and the impact they're having on the world, all through a diverse lens. I'm your host, Man Wong. On today's show, we have Alice Curry, founder and CEO of Lantana Publishing. Founded in 2014, Lantana is a diverse and inclusive children's publishing house specific focus on the BME. Alice, welcome to the show. Very excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
How are you feeling?
Not too bad, thanks.
Very good, yeah. So you've got a very hectic schedule. Lots of things going on. I know you've got a pitch tomorrow, which we could probably come across and have a chat about. But full disclosure for everyone, we're actually related, aren't we?
Oh, yeah. Not by blood. By my sister and your brother's marriage.
Yeah, and they have a beautiful little boy called
Ryan,
who will appear quite a lot in the conversations we're going to have, I bet.
Yes, that's right, because he was a real inspiration for what I'm doing in my company.
Brilliant. Well, we're very excited to have you on the show. In fact, you are our guest number one on the podcast show.
What an honor.
So a little bit of a guinea pig, I'm afraid. But we're going to have some fun today and have a chat about everything that you're doing with Lantana. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what Lantana is all about?
Yeah, of course. So, so as you said, I'm the founder of Lantana. We are a diverse and inclusive children's publishing house and social enterprise. So we work with authors and illustrators from underrepresented backgrounds to publish books in which all children can see themselves reflected. We have our core pillars of diversity and inclusion, social equality and environmental sustainability, and that really underpins everything we do.
Wow. So what drove you to work in this pretty, I imagine, hyper-competitive space, quite a niche focus as well, but very, very great social impact cause?
Well, I mean, when I started out, there was just such a gap in the market for any books that were reflective of the non-majority. So the vast majority of children's books, then and now, are reflective of the white, middle class, able-bodied, heterosexual majority. And only 1% of children's books in 2017, and we have those
statistics,
statistics, featured a BAME main character.
1%?
Only 1%. And this is in a country where a third of children identify as BAME. So that is around 2.5 million children, one of whom is our little nephew Ryan. So it came as a huge shock to me that there was this gap. I had sort of identified the gap through some professional work I'd done. I was previously a lecturer at a university in Australia and did some freelance work for a charity which saw me putting together collections of stories that were reflective of different backgrounds, different experiences, different cultures and ethnicities, and there was such a huge gap. And I thought, at this point, what do? I have a choice. I feel like I'm almost an accidental entrepreneur in the sense that I never started out, thinking I was going to end up founding a business. But when you're faced with such a stark gap and all the implications that come from that, then I felt like in many ways I had a responsibility to try and fill it.
Brilliant. And Lantana is a very, very interesting name. What inspired that?
It's actually a flower, and the flower has petals of different colours on each stem. So I thought it was a great metaphor for the change we want to see, which is children of all colours, of all ethnicities, of all backgrounds, reading happily on one earth.
That's amazing. So what is it that you do at Lantana then? Tell me about what you're doing day to day.
Yeah, so, well, the founder part, I guess, is quite obvious. The CEO part, so it's managing the day-to-day running of the business, so managing our staff, managing our processes. But it's, I think, probably more interestingly, more importantly, it's that idea of setting a vision and a culture for the company, setting a direction, sort of charting out a course for how we want to grow, how we want to scale. So it's really sort of that mixture of the sort of the details work, the management, and what I more consider as the leadership element, which is creating that sort of that bigger picture framework for the company.
So how many people are involved in Lantana at the moment?
So there are 4 of us at the moment.
Cool.
And yes, we work with lots of freelancers and contractors as well, but in terms of core team, there are 4. We are women from diverse backgrounds. One of us lives in the Philippines at the moment, so we're quite
I spoke to her, I remember.
A remote team, that's right. But yeah, we're all really passionate about what we do.
So tell me about the authors, the stars of the show, and the illustrators. Obviously, the ones on the podcast won't be able to see them, but really beautiful illustrations. This is a new book, I Am Brown.
It is, yeah. It's in fact not even out yet. It's coming out this month, I think, but not quite yet.
So this is written by Ashok Banker and illustrated by Sanjay Prabhat, right?
That's right.
So how did you come across some people like Ashok and Sanjay?
So Ashok actually is an interesting case because he has published, I think it's something like 60 or even 80 books for adults. He's known as the epic storyteller of India.
Wow.
Sold about 3 million copies, something like that. But he'd never written a children's book, and he became very interested in how important children's books can be for influencing young minds and setting values and influencing mindsets. And so he turned his sights to a picture book and came across us and submitted the work to us. In the meantime, Sanjay, she's also of Indian heritage, now living in the States, fantastic animator and illustrator.
Wow.
And those two, wanted to work together on a project, and it fitted our remit and it fitted what they wanted to achieve. So we came together.
So how do you find authors and illustrators of diverse backgrounds?
Yeah, so it's a mix. We have an open submissions policy on our website, which is quite unusual in the publishing world. If very often an author will need to find an agent before they can find a publisher. In our case, we want to open it up and be as inclusive as we possibly can. So authors can submit to us. If we fall in love with a manuscript, then we will find an illustrator who we think can sort of bring it to that, bring it alive. We will go through an editorial and a design process. And then we will send ultimately the file to a printing plant. We usually work with printers in the Far East, so in China primarily. And once the book's published, obviously we go through a marketing and a publicity campaign, and we sell the book directly from our site and also through, I think it's around 200 suppliers and wholesalers via distribution partners around the world.
Amazing. Wow, how cool is that? Disrupting the model, trying to be more inclusive as possible. So it's a good opportunity for anybody that's, I guess as a budding writer or illustrator, that's specifically with interest in diversity and inclusion, to submit their work to you as well? Yeah,
I mean, I feel we're in a really privileged position because we have a lot of submissions that are exclusively to us because we have said we welcome diverse voices. We want to hear from you if you have a unique story and you don't see yourselves on the shelves of bookshops. And we have these incredible stories that are submitted. We find hidden gems all the time, and I think it's one of those sort of sad transitions in publishing when the houses become so big that they don't have time to go through their own submissions. That's when they start working with agents, and agents can be hugely helpful, of course, but at the same time I really value that opportunity to find new voices right from the very start.
Wow. So I know, obviously we know each other quite well. I know you've got a passion for, spearheading diversity in the children's publishing area. So, but what drove you? What's the real mission? I know you talked about falling into this accidentally, But I mean, you started it before Ryan came along.
I did,
So-
yeah. I did. I mean, although not before your brother had come along.
That's true.
So I was fully aware that my sister and your brother were going to produce in some future period our lovely mixed race nephews and soon to be nephew and niece as well.
Yeah.
That was one personal, reason why I felt that it was important on a personal level. But I think, as I said, if you see any kind of gap and you don't think it's right or it's fair, if there's some level of inequality, I think at that point it really became for me a question of, can I use the privilege that I have to try and do something about it? And at the time it was a huge, sort of leap in the dark. I had very little idea what I was doing. I had never worked in a publishing house, so I had worked on books and I had studied books. So academically, I was quite, I had quite a lot of experience of children's literature, but not in terms of producing my own. And so it was really a question of learning everything from the bottom up. And at the time, I felt like my naivety in this space and my lack of experience was going to hold me back, was a real barrier. I think this is something that women feel a lot, that idea of being an imposter, that imposter syndrome, the sense that someone's going to catch you out for not knowing what you're doing. But when I look back on it a few years later, I actually perceive it as a real strength, because it allowed me to not fall into the traps of the very standard, very sort of set ways that publishing often works. It allowed me to question processes and the infrastructure and say, why is it that you do it that way? Why is it that we don't have books that are reflective of diverse backgrounds? And ask those kind of questions and try and do things a bit differently. So ultimately, I think that really helped me, set me on the path that I'm on now.
Brilliant. And how's the journey been?
A huge roller coaster, but better than I could have possibly dreamed of in so many ways. We had some wonderful sort of milestone successes quite early on. Our first book, for instance, won an award in the States.
What was the book?
It's called Chicken in the Kitchen.
Chicken in the Kitchen. And one of my daughter's favourites.
And it is, it won the Children's Africana Best Book Award, which took us to Washington to the Smithsonian for an award ceremony. And we did a book reading at the Library of Congress. And I thought,
wow.
First book, if we can manage that, we
this stuff's easy.
No, so it hasn't all been like that. But I think just those kind of, those milestones as I went, really sort of, kept me going and think that there is a way that we can make change in this space, because traditional publishing, there are many things wrong with it. I think everyone would agree. I don't think I'm saying anything out of the ordinary there. And so to try and sort of innovate on processes and try and sort of do things a bit differently has really been the driving force behind that. And any time that we get any kind of recognition for what we're doing, and we've been very lucky critically and in terms of other awards and various things that have come along on the way, then that sort of just that justification that actually the industry really does need this, and people are looking for change.
I totally agree. I think there's lots of people working in things, in industries, in roles that have a traditional, more orthodox framework, and this is how we've always done it, but without encouraging or enabling free thinking and the ability to sort of stretch behind that. We're always pushing those boundaries, right? But the best way in order to do that is to think differently, and in order for you to do that, you need to work with and encourage diverse thinking, and that needs you to be more inclusive. So I think it's a brave step that what you guys are doing, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who will be applauding that kind of work there, Alice, which is brilliant. So but I mean, aside from all I downloaded, I had a look on your LinkedIn page, and the short list of awards, and there's no, I think without really sort of numbering them properly, it's in double digits here, which is phenomenal, right? For a 6-year-old business, team of 4, hyper competitive space that we talked about, heavily dominated by, when we were just chatting off air, four main publishing houses. So
the big 5, yeah.
Big 5, sorry, even. Hopefully soon to be big 6. But it's a tough nut to crack. So what sort of challenges have you had?
Yeah, it's yes, as you say, it is a challenging space. It's partly a challenging space because it is an industry dominated by big players. It is a high discount, low margin industry, which means there's very little appetite for risk. It's very difficult to take risks when the margins are so small. There's very long cash flow time lags. There's very long lead times. All of that makes for a very difficult structure to change. And so you can understand to some extent why the industry has become very sort of established in its processes. So we compete with that. Our advantage is that we are small, we're agile, we can make decisions quicker, we can bring new concepts and ideas to market quicker. We can take more risks. It's sort of, we live on or die by the risks we take. So obviously, if it doesn't work out, then that's the risk we're taking. Whereas I think larger houses have slightly more to play with, but at the same time they have much less appetite for it because there's, it's always has to be about the bottom line. So when it comes to publishing itself, it is a challenging market. It's one where you sell through a series of wholesalers and suppliers and retailers, which means you have very little control of that buying process. It's hard to trace your book's passage from publication to its ultimate buyer or its reader ultimately.
So you know very little about the audience.
So it's hard to understand to know who is buying our books and what they feel about them. Obviously we have some understanding of that through social media and the fabulous people who buy our books direct from us. We can very much more understand who is engaging with us and with the community that we're creating online. But in general, it's a process that is quite removed from the ultimate consumer. So all of that is quite hard for a small publishing house to manage. I think on the other side of things, given that I see ourselves more as a startup, as an early stage venture, a social enterprise, an entrepreneurial sort of venture, there is that understanding that you're working in a space where you will, in whatever capacity, probably be looking for funding at some point. And I think in that regard, there are a couple of challenges. One being a female founder. We've started to talk about this earlier. And the other being a social impact business, which again is quite, I think, unjustifiably, but quite scary for some, VCs and venture capital funds when they're looking at potential investment. So
I totally echo those sentiments. I mean, with Candidate X, people really struggle with how you can be, positively social impactful at the same time being a commercial business, and we were talking about this earlier, right? The two are not mutually exclusive. You can quite easily draw a nice Venn diagram and illustrate where everything overlaps in that sense. And I guess on funding, what they're interested in is, are you going to be a 5Xer? And how does that experience make you feel?
It's very disheartening. It's one of those times if you have a meeting with a VC who tells you that they really they couldn't really care less about your social impact or about the mission statement or about any of the things that actually drive me. Then it sort of makes you question: is this the route you would want to take? Ultimately, we haven't taken that route because we don't feel that it fits with what we're trying to achieve as a company. But it's sort of a give and take. You can understand it from various perspectives, but I think ultimately for us, if we didn't have our social impact mission statement right at the heart of what we do, we wouldn't have we wouldn't have the heart of us, but we also wouldn't have what has endeared us to our loyal customers, to the people who want to champion us. We have multiple sort of bloggers and booksellers and librarians and teachers and parents who are incredibly behind our mission. And I think if we didn't have that mission statement, where would we be? You need that centralizing point where people all gravitate towards, because although you're a team of 4 holistically as Lantana, your community of advocates and your network of bloggers that you talk about, and our authors and our illustrators. I mean, I think we have we have around 50 of them, I think, and they're across something like 30 countries or something. So just sort of, in terms of geographic breadth, and we have, wholesale. We have distributors in the States and in Australia, and we have publicity people in the States, and we're sort of all over. And I think, and that's I think as you need to be. You need to be a sort of a global or sort of an outward-facing business. But yeah, you need something that will tie everyone together and give them a reason to want to champion you and your books.
And it's so interesting, isn't it? We talked about Ashok earlier, as you described him as the epic storyteller of India, right, for adult stories, who's now broken out of that comfort zone to write about children's story, because he obviously identifies with the message and the ideas that you guys are doing. And it's so disappointing to have other people sitting on the other side of the table with the purse strings that can really enable you to grow and scale and hit impact with a bigger audience, not really understanding that. And that always bewilders me. And I hope we can spread those challenges out to the audience, and for them to sort of give us some help and some guidance around this, because I doubt you're the only person feeling this way, as a female founder and also someone working in a diverse space with social impact at heart, right? Yeah. So let's talk about publishing. What's diversity like in publishing?
Yeah, it's not good. It's the short answer. So when I started 5 years ago, actually the landscape has changed quite a lot since then. We are still a very, very white middle class industry in terms of workforce. There are some actually very positive initiatives beginning to come into play to try and change that, and many of them driven by the larger houses. So it is, I think there is some positive moves there. But in terms of the books produced, as I mentioned, the 1% statistic of children's books that feature BAME main characters. I think so. That was 2017. I think it has gone up potentially to 4% by 2018. But this change is slow. It is not at all reflective of our populations. So there is a lot of work that still needs to be done within this space, and I think it's fair to say that the small independents like us are sort of trying to drive that change and be at the vanguard of it, and hopefully in the longer term these changes that we are seeing come through will be long term, will be long lasting, rather than just sort of here now, because the conversation is so vocal at the moment.
I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Because trying to break what people are customarily identifying with, and understanding that children's books particularly, it's kind of like, we read a lot of Roald Dahl, for instance, and I always identify with their characters, but I've never really ever thought about them being BAME or anything. And now that I've got my own kids, and Scarlett's asking a lot more questions around, not necessarily about ethnicity, but she notices colour now. She's only 5, or not even 5 yet, and she's asking about these things. And I think it's good to have that reflection, so they can see themselves as characters in this space. So, are there many other publishers doing what you're doing? Not to promote other competitors, obviously.
No, very happy to, because we're actually, I don't see the other small independents as competitors in that sense, because actually we are a very inclusive bunch, in that we do try and help each other, and we promote each other, and we try and make space for the other, because I think the more people who are talking about inclusive books being important, the more that message is going to get through to the sort of the wider sort of networks. So there are a couple of others, like there's one called Tiny Owl, there's one called Cassava Republic, there is Hope Road, there's Alana Max. There are a few, and at this point, I think sort of, as I said, we're the ones who are saying, right, come on guys, these things need to change. And when it comes to showing children that this is possible, I think for us what was really important was not that we were to produce books which were about diversity, or we're looking at issues around what it meant to be diverse, or what we were trying to do is say, do you know what, you can be a child of any colour, of any background, of any ethnicity, of any, be able-bodied, you can be disabled, you can be identify as LGBTQ+, or whatever it might be, and yet you deserve to see yourself going on an adventure, or having fun, or making friends, or exploring the world, or just being a child. So I think what was important to us is as I said, to just show that an inclusive community, should exist in the pages of books, so that you can see yourself in any walk of life at any point. Imagine yourself to be a superhero, whatever it might be, rather than saying, okay, that's only reserved for a particular type of book or a particular type of person.
Excellent, yeah. So how many titles do you have now?
We will have published 35 by the end of the year.
That's amazing.
Feels like quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you and your team deserve an immense amount of credit for that.
Thank you.
You know, putting 35 titles into people's hands and having that impact that you talk about. So what's the future look like for Lantana?
Well, I think we're going to, as far as we can, keep on publishing books that are reflective of, as wide a breadth of, humanity as we can.
Are there plans to branch out beyond BAME as well?
Yes, we are currently, open to. We are, sort of actively looking for stories that are reflective of wider facets of diversity. We want to just sort of, say any experience, any background that's important that you don't see on the shelves and that would help people, children feel like they belong, is important, and we want to hear from you, because primarily, we're looking for good stories, and good stories are about everyone. In terms of where we go from here, I think we're interested in partnerships and looking into ways of collaborating with other organisations who are share our values and who are like-minded. We are always interested in what's happening in the sort of the ed tech space, because I see quite a lot of synergies with that sector and ways in which we might be able to sort of work in that and collaborate, and hopefully just sort of keeping on putting children and our readers at the center of things. I think when running a business, and particularly sort of managing it, and when you're sort of immersed in all the day-to-day challenges of it, it's really helpful to me to remember to step back and sort of think about how our books are being received. And one of my favorite bits of the job is actually getting to, on the rare occasions, accompanying our authors and our illustrators to, say, a school or a library or a book event of some kind, a literary festival maybe, and meeting some of the children who in some cases are seeing themselves in a book for the first time. And we've just had some absolutely heartbreaking stories of children who have just been so moved by being able to see themselves or their families or their communities, their neighborhoods in a book, and I for me that's absolutely sort of where it all sort of lands. So wherever we go from here, I think I'm trying to say, as long as I remember, why we're doing what we're doing, and that is the important thing, then,
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I was lucky enough to be at one of the readings when one of your books previously came out, and I took Scarlett at the time.
I did.
And Trina and I went there, and we saw the reading there, and it was mobbed. It was there was
lots of people.
Yeah, I can remember. I was so impressed with the turnout, and when I say there was all walks of life there, and a genuine diverse crowd. And
you know what? It was actually at that very event. I've just remembered an incident where, I don't know if you would have seen this exchange, but a family came up to me and said that they'd driven 3 hours to get there.
Wow.
They were Black British, and this was the first time they'd seen a Black author, and they wanted to show their young daughter, that she could be anything she wanted to be. And I just thought it was the most beautiful.
And I think that's so key. At Candidate X we talk a lot about we use the play on word of candidate, and one of our things that we're going to be pushing out is the I can, we can, I did kind of feels. And that's what I want to talk to you about, really, the time that we've got, about everything that you're describing here sounds like you self-taught, right? You stumbled upon these things and go, oh right, why does it work that way? And trying to rework the wheel if you're allowed to make this framework a bit more elastic. And obviously there's going to be obstacles and rebuttals along the way. For people who are in that daily grind and those challenges at the moment in time, I mean, did you have access to mentors and things like that? Because I want to talk to you a little bit about the mentor aspect that you're doing for other people at this point in time, right? And how valuable that is for budding entrepreneurs or innovators at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I hadn't sort of, I don't think I'd had any kind of, or definitely no formal mentorship, and I've come across, wonderful people in the past who I have admired and who have been, very helpful in terms of being able to sit down and talk to you about things, not so much in a mentorship way, but just in a sort of a professor at university or something, someone who you can look up to. I think it's hugely valuable. So my first kind of real entry into this was through an accelerator program that I undertook last year, as you know about, where we had access to business mentors, business leaders of various kinds, and were sort of sitting down with us and talking through our company and through our challenges and through our growth and our scaling, and just that capacity to be able to sit down and talk to someone, whether or not in your own industry. And in this particular case, there was no one from publishing, so it was, which is not surprising in lots of ways.
Were they all tech?
All tech. But to have a sort of dispassionate eye, but someone who is there for in order to help. There was no sense that they had their own agenda. It was definitely what can we do to help you, and it's very empowering having that opportunity to be able to take that conversation forward. And in my case, I think one of the struggles I had was that idea of. I mentioned imposter syndrome. I think sort of coming into an industry, being a founder without having felt like I knew much about business, let alone anything else. I hadn't done an MBA. I hadn't sort of worked at McKinsey, all the kind of the normal ways into starting up an accelerator or a venture. And so I felt very much like I didn't know the language around it. I didn't know the terminology. It's very basic things, but there are ways that founders talk and entrepreneurs talk to each other, and there's ways that you talk to VCs. Or anyone who's sort of in the funding space, and if you don't know that the terms to use, it can feel very it can feel disempowering. It can feel as if you're not meant to sort of be at that table. So one of the things I've enjoyed doing is talking to primarily women, but sort of early stage founders or women entering into publishing, and talking to them about that idea of actually it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to be yourself. It's okay to admit when you don't know something. I think what people ultimately look for is they look for drive, they look for passion, they look for a sense that you are that you're excited and motivated by what you do. And if you don't happen to know some element
of the vernacular,
exactly, then that ultimately there's a small hurdle, whereas it can feel like a very large hurdle. So I think it's that idea that there should be space for you to come in being relatively naive to the process, if you're willing to work hard and you have a vision and you have somewhere you want to get to, and particularly I guess being a woman on our accelerator program, which I think was actually quite forward thinking and much more diverse and inclusive than I expected it might be. But we were I think of the 10 businesses that they accepted onto the program that year, there were 3 of us that had a female founder. So, but yet I still felt in many cases that I'm one woman in a big room of men or whatever it might be, and so it's and I know that it's a difficult space. Just statistically, we mentioned briefly, the VC and funding before, but I think women get only around 8% of all the equity that's invested in the UK each year, which there's huge disparities. It's a very unequal landscape. So it's an intimidating space to come into if you haven't had the kind of the training around business, and if you haven't, and if you are the woman in the room. So I think passing that on is is really helpful to say, look, actually we can be approachable. Like I'm very happy to talk to anyone who is interested in either starting up their own business or wants to innovate within their own space. Entrepreneurship is hugely important as well as entrepreneurship. I would never be. In fact, I'm always quite impressed when people approach me and say, would you mind? Could we have a coffee, or could you just give me some advice on something? And if I have time, and that would be the only hurdle. But if I can, we will always sit down and have a chat. So women in business, women in publishing. I think it's just really important to pass on that knowledge if you can.
Are they formalised networks then, as part of their mentor piece? Or?
There can be. One of them is as part of the Oxford University Careers Service that I'm sort of mentoring for now. But often it's relatively informal. Another one is a formal structure through the Oxford Foundry, which is the accelerated space in which Lantana is currently based. It can be formal or informal. I think ultimately it's always helpful.
I think, for me, obviously someone that knows you quite well as well and finds out a lot about what you're doing and the updates, I'm always impressed with the work that you guys have been able to produce and then the traction you've got. And I know how you are. You're incredibly harsh on yourself here and what you think you've done. So, I mean, in a word, how successful do you feel that the journey's been so far?
I can say I'm impressed with ourselves. I was going to say
So
thankful. I am thankful. No, but it doesn't come easy. And actually, that's a really interesting thing about the difference, amongst other things, but difference in the way that women communicate versus men.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the real differences in why, for instance, we may not be as successful at raising funds is because we are more modest in some ways. We don't tend to sort of
men blag.
Well, right, yeah, we're not very good at blagging. But anyway, I think actually from looking at where we started to where we've got now, it's quite wonderful, like that journey. I think we are looking to become more and more sustainable as we go. It's always a challenge. Small publishing will always be a challenge, but there are ways in which we can mitigate some of that. So, for instance, I mentioned that we sell through a whole series of suppliers and wholesalers, but within the publishing spectrum, we're selling at very high discount, which makes our margins even smaller. Whereas when we sell direct to customers through our website, it's not only a fantastic way of sort of gauging what people are looking for in terms of the books they buy, but also helping our margins in that regard and building a community around what we do. And so the more that we can sort of encourage that kind of community, I think is really helpful. So what I'm trying to say is, in terms of success, I think we have been, we've been incredibly lucky with how we have found we've hit on something which people seem to really, really love, but we can always do more and create bigger communities and spread the word about what we're trying to achieve, and also, share the work of our fantastic and fabulous authors, and who I am, constantly, in admiration of for their work. So
brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it's such a good direction of travel, to try and break through this space, get a bigger audience about what you're trying to achieve, get people onto these ideas. And that's why we wanted to invite you here today, so that people who are connected to Candidate X has that impassionment for equality, diversity, and inclusion in work, but can also now think about this in a different way for their kids or schools they're affiliated with, and making sure that you guys get the exposure that you really, really deserve. And we hope that we can help you with that. I guess final words really from you are, what's the clear ambition that you guys want to really achieve, where you feel, okay, this is really successful now, and how can our audience and our community help you with that?
Well, I mean, so if I take it right back to why books and why reading, and I think it's so abundantly clear that developing a lifelong love of reading in children is one of the best, if not the best, head start you can give them in life. I was reading some statistics in around some things which I found quite shocking. For instance, the number of books that a child has in the home affects their literacy more than the number of years they're in school. So as in,
wow.
So I mean, literally, if you have a shelf of books at home, it's going to. Well, I'm not going to. Yeah, I think people can go and find the statistic and actually read exactly what it means. But ultimately it's this huge sense that having books in the home is incredibly important to your future prospects. And 1 in 10, I think it is, households in the UK currently have no books at all. So we're looking at, 1 in 10 children who are starting off with a huge disadvantage, and particularly when the books that are there are unrepresentative of their lives and their experiences and their communities and their families. There's that one further barrier to developing that love of reading. So mission is to, try and get as many children as possible to develop that love of reading, and to see themselves reflected in the books they read. And where we go from there, I mean, our mission statement is because all children deserve to see themselves in the books they read. So, big dream can get all children to, I think we're looking to change the landscape. We're trying to make it, we'll make the publishing industry as a whole sit up and say, actually, no, we can't keep on producing the same types of books forever and ever. We need to be inclusive in the way that we approach the market, and for us to grow and scale to the point where we can have as big an impact as we possibly can in that regard.
Okay, I mean, what more really can you say? I mean, you're the challenge is breaking out of a very traditional model.
Yeah.
The challenge is access for people. There's a social mobility context there, right?
Yeah. And I think that's it. I think, you asked about what a community can do. And I think, one of the things that we have found challenging is that idea of breaking out of traditional structures within publishing, and there are very many people who are alienated by those traditional structures, whether it is that they can't see themselves in the books that they're buying, or whether that going into a bookshop is it feels like an alien space, or whether whether there's just very little disposable income. There are communities out there that are just being very much underserved by the publishing industry as it currently stands, and the publishing structure supplier routes and routes to market. And so I think one of the things that would be fantastic is to build a kind of a community around access, around sort of looking at different ways in which we can get our books, but also other wonderful inclusive books into the hands of children who aren't currently being accessed or aren't currently finding them. And so any ideas on how to do that, any entry points into communities, any people who are excited about sort of trying to be a pathway into those communities, that I think that would be a fantastic avenue to explore. And
I am pretty confident there are people out there that can definitely help with that. So we're excited to get the word out. We certainly believe Lantana is very much akin to what Candidate X is. The whole hashtag of I am Candidate X, really, I feel when I look at what you guys are about, is exactly that, and
absolutely,
we really want to sort of help get the word out there as best as possible. So
well, thank you, and I mean, and to you too. I think what you're doing is fantastic. I mean, I think putting diversity and inclusion sort of right at the heart of recruitment is exactly where it needs to be, and I think that building your kind of the platform around crowd sourcing, crowd curation, sort of really democratizing the whole process is it has to be the way forward in terms of giving that kind of lobbying power and sort of being able to make change. So I'll be rooting. We'll be rooting for you too.
Many thanks to you, Alice. We'd love to get you back on a further date to see how things have progressed and moved on. So well, thank you. Good luck with the pitch tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey listeners, it's Man. We hope you enjoyed our first show. We learned a lot from Alice and really loved her passion and vision. If you did too, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you think. Tell us what we can improve on and what you want to know about our guests and their work. Check out Lantana's Instagram as well on Lantana_publishing. Lantana is spelled Lantana to see their amazing books. Please buy direct from Lantana. Buying directly from them keeps small businesses going, and they also offer a one donated book for every book purchase, all directly from their site. Candidate X has also 10 beautiful Lantana books to give away. So keep an eye out on our socials to see how you can win one. So until the next episode, be good, be kind, stay safe.